for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Jenny Rooney, editor of the CMO Network at Forbes. As part of her role there, she runs the CMO Summit, as well as a number of other initiatives like the Forbes CMO University Alumni series, interviewing CEOs and CMOs for her ongoing Forbes CMO interview series. Today on the show, we talk a lot about the role of CMO, what's happening in marketing today, and the trends and challenges and opportunities that she sees. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jenny. Well, Jenny, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Jenny Rooney. I'm the editor of the CMO Network at Forbes.
Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with your background and how did you find your way to running the CMO Network at Forbes?
I know it's a unique job. I never imagined that this would be obviously what I'd ultimately be doing back when I was studying English literature and creative writing in undergrad, and then later on to get my master's in magazine journalism. But it's a fantastic job, and it's applying all those things that I learned when I got those degrees. But I started out not unlike a lot of folks in who are aspiring journalists back in the early 90s. And I thought I wanted to write for a consumer magazine, move to New York eventually and work for Condé Nast or something like that, or actually go to Emmaus, Pennsylvania and write for Outside Magazine or one of those really cool backpacker magazines, et cetera. But I just, at the time I got a job. My first job out of grad school was working for a trade magazine because quickly I realized that if you wanted to do the task, if you liked the idea of reporting and writing, the consumer books in New York City were very out of reach at that point. And obviously you needed to find opportunity. And opportunity for me came in the form of writing for a trade magazine covering the long-term healthcare industry in Chicago. And I worked there for a couple of years, moved to another magazine covering the use of IT in a healthcare space. And from that experience in writing about IT, I actually was interviewed by Advertising Age in New York City. They were looking for an interactive reporter, and that's what they called it at the time, which was going to be a reporter who would cover this new and emerging kind of ad agency, which at the time we called interactive agencies, and ad serving networks. And sort of this was the beginning of the time when we didn't even use the word digital necessarily to describe where advertising was going, but it was indeed the beginning of digital advertising. But of course, this was when there were banner ads and things like that. Long story short, Ad Age in 1999 was my first taste of covering the advertising, marketing, and brand industry as a reporter. I found it incredibly exciting. I was writing about .coms during the .com boom. I was going on TV shows, being interviewed about Super Bowl commercials, because at the time, all the Super Bowl commercials were the pets.coms of the world. And from that experience, I really stayed in this area of covering, as a journalist, covering the marketing, advertising, and brand industry. Went to a bunch of different other magazines and soon found my niche to be focusing exclusively on executive level decision makers in marketing and advertising. So therefore, chief marketing officers and CEOs at agencies. And that has become first at Ad Age, because I went back to Ad Age a second time to be editor of something called Point, which at the time was a monthly supplement that was for and about CMOs that was later folded into the main magazine as CMO Strategy. And then I was asked to join Forbes, and that was about 8 years ago. And so I've been covering exclusively CMOs, I would say, for the better part of a decade, if not more. So here I am at Forbes CMO Network, and that's what I do. I talk to CMOs every day, all day, and I do it in so many different venues and contexts. So it's an exciting area to cover. There's some pretty extraordinary people.
Well, with covering the industry for so long, have you ever had a desire to work in it, either on the agency side or the client side?
Short answer is no. But the longer answer is the
You know
more I
too
get.
much.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the case. No, I think I do find it super intriguing, even as I find it super challenging. But I do know all the ins and outs and all the different angles of the industry and sort of all the component parts. And I think at the end of the day, I love talking to the people who are leading it and who are creating that change. I just it'd be interesting for me to see if I had any aptitude at this point. I jokingly, a lot of people who follow me in social media or things like that who really don't know me well, I think they initially think that I am in fact a CMO, which I always have a chuckle when I get some kind of out of nowhere emails about, I want to help you as a CMO do this, that, and the other. And I have to explain, well, as a matter of fact, I'm just writing about them. But no, I think it's cool. I do think there's a huge opportunity right now for journalists in the marketing industry. I mean, brands need people who know how to write, right? Brands need storytellers. And so, in fact, we are seeing many cases of brands, of companies hiring people who know how to write, how to put words together, how to communicate. I mean, those skills are more important now than ever, arguably, even as we're living in this hyper digital age. And so I suppose I could very well make a case for the fact that my skills might translate very well working on that side of things. But for now, I'm very happy with my perch and the way that I can kind of regard all the component parts, as I mentioned earlier. So
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, you do cover. You cover the industry. You cover all these executives. What do you feel like? How would you describe the state of marketing today? It's a challenged market, I think, in my opinion. But
yeah, it's a constant state of flux, and that's not just in the tenure of the CMOs in the seats. I mean, obviously that's sort of a fun stat that Spencer Stewart puts out every year. I think that number is right around 43 months right now. So certainly the role itself is, they say CMOs are on the hot seat, and I think that's because they are constantly trying to balance short-term wins against true long-term brand building, and there's so many arrows in the quiver right now for CMOs. There's so many options. I think that that's the biggest challenge right now is figuring out what do you decide to use and what do you decide to eschew? Because a lot of it is, we're also judging people based on innovation and change. And to do that as a CMO, I would imagine you feel sort of this pressure to want to experiment with things and new technologies, et cetera. All that's fantastic. And that might garner some cool headlines. But at the end of the day, CMOs need to be driving business growth. They absolutely need to be not a cost center, not an extravagance. Marketing and advertising is not window dressing. It isn't sort of the side project that companies do when times are good. I mean, these are, or when times are bad. I mean, this is a vital and critical role within organizations, or should be. And I think we're seeing a lot of CMOs make it their charge to explain to everybody else in the C-suite why marketing is so necessary, why it's so vital, and talk in a language that certainly CFOs can understand, CEOs can understand. So I think there's this combination of constantly proving yourself, proving to the business that you're necessary. But then the flip side is it is exciting. I mean, there's a lot going on. And so for all that challenge of new technology and new opportunity and pressures from procurement that never went away after the recession, by the way, at the same time, when you get it right, that's gold, right? That's exciting. And CMOs at the end of the day, they still are creative professionals. They still, for all the talk about data and analytics and needing to understand, the science behind marketing, which is very, very true. They love a brilliant creative idea. They love seeing a brand promise brought to life in words and pictures and sound and movement and experiences and all the other ways that great brand advertising or marketing engagement comes to life. And I think that's what really still continues to motivate really great CMOs.
Well, I know like you've said, we actually both spend a lot of time talking to these folks. And You've described some of the tensions in the role. Do you feel like the role is changing at all, or has it remained consistent in your mind?
Totally changing. Well, I think it's both. I think at the end of the day, nobody else owns the customer within organizations other than the except the chief marketing officer. Although, from what I gather, CIOs are probably very quick to say that they own the relationship. Given the fact that technology is so squarely a part of that relationship these days. But I think as far as understanding customers and consumers, understanding what drives them, their motivations, their passions, the CMO has been and will always be that executive in the C-suite who owns that. And I think that is what makes them so unique. So I don't think that's changed. And I think the ways of interacting with and understanding consumers and customers has changed. What has changed is what I touched on earlier, which is around this concept that a CMO necessarily needs to be driving not just brand, but business growth. And so therefore there has been this new focus on having to have conversations and being in boardrooms, sitting at a boardroom table where you're actually explaining the relevance of marketing to any given organization and why the investments that are being made need to be made, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those things are new. We're seeing that in things, you could call it just semantics, but I think there's actually real truth behind it, where we're seeing in some organizations, like Coca-Cola, for example, getting rid of the chief marketing officer title and instead calling it chief growth officer. I think people are in other organizations have chief customer officer. I think obviously we're seeing through those new titles some of that reflection of the changing nature of the role and how, a lot of organizations are trying to get their hands around what the CMO needs to be. I think the challenge is when the CMO starts to be, the Jack or Jane of all trades, and there's just so much that's thrown at them: culture, talent, product development. All these things are falling on the desks of CMOs, and so that's where the change and challenge is coming in.
Okay. Anybody stand out or impressing you these days that you've talked to or highlighted?
There's so many. It's hard to pick just one. Folks like Diego Scotti at Verizon or Deb Wall at Cadillac, Marcel Marcondes at Anheuser-Busch. These are people who have just an incredible passion for their customer set, are trying to maintain relevance of brands and indeed evolve them for a next generation. And so folks like that, who are CMOs at legacy companies, and I'll call them legacy companies for lack of a better word. That's a unique individual, and I think they're incredibly inspiring in how they're evolving dialogue or evolving conversation around those brands and in interaction with those brands. Flip side, there are CMOs at younger and emerging companies that are so much fun to watch because they are, they are daring. They show a lot of new kinds of complexities in the way brands can come to life. For example, a Jill Kress at National Geographic Partners, or Jeff Brooks at Casper, Jill Mather at Squarespace. These are folks who are they've got brands that National Geographic, not a new brand, obviously a very iconic brand, but going through a huge change right now. Squarespace, brand new young brand. Casper, a new lifestyle brand. These folks recognize sort of the opportunity they have, and I think the challenge for them is, when you have such an incredible opportunity for growth and for really establishing these brands on a big stage, the ways in which you do that are where they're having to spend a lot of their time. So those are just some examples, and the list is endless of folks that I really admire and respect. People like Karen Walker at Cisco, Linda Boff at GE, Raja Rajamanar at MasterCard. So Vimla Gupta at Equinox. There's just so many cool people doing so many amazing things to make and keep brands as relevant as possible today among their customer set. So
no, and I know we don't have enough time today to name them all, I'm sure.
Don't. Yeah. Plus I get in trouble if I didn't mention that.
Exactly. Well, marketing talent, kind of switching gears a little bit, it seems to have been an issue for, it seems like a decade or more now. And I was this was probably last fall, I was at a summit with a bunch of CMOs around a round table. And the question, I think I may have asked this question, but do you have anyone on your staff that could step into your role tomorrow? 0 hands went up. And then ensued a long conversation from there. But it just seems like this talent issue won't go away, and I don't see the industry doing anything about it. I don't know if you see anything that I'm not seeing.
Well, as a matter of fact, so this is by far the single most important topic for me personally. I mean, I'm so passionate about this topic, and I know for a fact that this is indeed a topic that is front and center among all CMOs right now. Forbes just had an event last week around our CMO Next list, which is a new list of 50 people who are redefining the CMO role even as they're living it. And that's kind of something we can talk about in a minute. But every single time we gather CMOs together in conversation, it always comes down to the talent issue. And in fact, that's what this discussion we had the other night ultimately came down to. It doesn't matter how old a company you are, how young, where you have been in the journey, but talent is the single biggest thing that's keeping CMOs up at night. It's the single biggest thing that they're spending their time on. And I would say somewhat reluctantly, because there's a million, as we just said before, there's a million things that they need to be focused on, but they are spending an incredible amount of time trying to figure out this talent challenge. So there's a couple things going on in the industry that I'm involved with and certainly aware of. The ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, formed their CMO Growth Council last year at Cannes, and that's when they kicked it off. And that was a group formed to identify the 4 or 5 areas of growth opportunity for CMOs. The 4 or 5 areas where CMOs really need to be sort of investing in almost codifying best practices so that they can all be successful in these areas and truly drive that business growth, as we discussed earlier. One of those areas, of course, is talent. And I'm actually part of that particular task force. And we just had a meeting in New York last week as well, where CMOs are getting together and talking about the issue, but also trying to come up with solutions for it. ANA has a collaboration with the AEF. Actually, I think the AEF is part of the ANA now. That's the Advertising Educational Foundation. And that's sort of a network of schools with which they have relationships so that they can kind of connect CMOs with those schools. I will also explain to you one thing that I started 6 years ago, which I'm particularly proud of, because to me, this program was formed as not the only, but one way to bridge the gap between marketing practice and marketing education. That gap has arguably always been there, but it's only getting more pronounced and more challenging as we move into, sort of this new era of marketing. So I developed 6 years ago, it's called it's a mouthful, but the Forbes CMO University Alumni series. And what that is I partner with business schools around the country to help them identify and bring back to campus, not just 1 or 2, because we've always had alumni who, 1 or 2 alumni who come back at a time and give presentations on campus. And that's fantastic. I think that what this model was meant to be was to bring back a quote unquote critical mass of rock star marketing talent, all of whom came out of that given school. And the goal has always been to keep it to the highest level, right? So I'm looking for CMOs or agency CEOs, all of whom came out of that given school. Bring them back to campus, and we put on a 1.5-day-long symposium. It's like a mini summit for the students, for the professors, and it's also beneficial for the returning alumni who come away with sort of this newfound network of people in the industry, and they may not realize that all those folks are also former alumni. And unless you had a really bad experience in college, you have an affinity for your alma mater and for the people who also came out of that program. So it's been a really cool program. I've done it at Fuqua at Duke, Tuck at Dartmouth, Mendoza at Notre Dame, University of Texas at Austin, Ross at Michigan, Michigan State. I've been talking to folks out in California, Stanford and Haas. I'm going to do one at Clemson University for the first time. I've done a couple at University of South Carolina, the Darla Moore School of Business there. And actually the original one that started all of this was at my alma mater, which was Miami of Ohio. And their business school there is the Farmer School of Business. And we've been doing an event like this there for all those 6 years. And the other schools we've done, I've gone back and done them 2, 3, 4 times in a row, because once the model is sort of set, schools just love it and love to replicate it every year. And it's just been an incredible program and a really robust and inspiring way to get 10 to 15 world-class CMOs on one school stage and basically have, this wealth of knowledge present to the students. And the students have found it incredibly inspiring. And I think there's been a real opportunity there for schools to learn from it too, because there's a receptivity among academics right now to really hear from those in practice, so that they can really revamp their curricula such that it meets the demands of today's marketplace. So anyway, those are just some examples of how I've personally been involved in this topic of talent, because if we can sort of get these messages and this exposure to college students and even younger about how incredible a profession marketing can be and how an incredible career opportunity that can be, that's only going to help the industry, right? Because we're creating that pipeline. And we're essentially, to borrow a term from Greg Welch at Spencer Stewart, we're marketing, right? We're really finally getting young people to recognize that they don't have to go to Google or Facebook or even start their own companies, with marketing skills. They can go work at some of these incredible companies that are building in-house agencies and creating, all kinds of experimentation around AI and have marketing be the place where they apply those skills. And that in turn is going to help these companies survive moving forward. So fun stuff.
Well, I applaud your efforts, because it's no easy task to bridge the gap between practice and academic training in marketing. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love doing it. So
Well, you just hit on a couple of things. There's a lot going on in the solution provider ecosystem, if you will, with agencies, consultancies, tech companies, and clients, if you will, oscillating. I don't know what the right term is here, but going from in-housing to outsourcing to building new revenue generating units like Target just announced with Roundel. How do you make sense of the evolution and the changes that are going on? And do you see any equilibrium coming where there's a steady state for a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in flux right now, right? Agencies are really in flux. Kind of what's their reason for being? I think they're struggling with that. Is it just creativity? Is it owning, the data? Is it being the digital masterminds, to create digital transformation for clients? Meanwhile, progressive companies want to feel like they should have some of those capabilities, especially sort of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, the things that are sort of, why outsource it when you can just do it yourself? Especially, and that's a cost efficiency issue right there. I think they're trying to figure out, well, what can we bring in house? We've got people who have the aptitude. By the way, we're living at a time when things are happening so quickly. Where it's basically on-demand marketing all the time. Why add that extra layer of an agency partner when we could just be doing this in house? So I think it still varies across the board. Some agencies are quick to say, we love it when clients have in-house capabilities because we jibe better that way. I mean, we can create better outputs when there's that aptitude on the client side. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. I don't think we're ever going to, I think eventually we're going to get to a place where it's not an either or, it's an and clients are going to have, just as they're breaking down silos and they just can't have, marketing isn't so siloed within organizations either, right? It's something, it's a living, breathing component of all companies that every employee is arguably a marketer, and owns the brand, customers own the brand, but, is a custodian of the brand. I think likewise, these so-called agency capabilities, you're going to find them as much in-house as capabilities at clients. And, and I think agencies at the end of the day, they do provide exposure to new creative thinking that companies can't by themselves always have full access to. So agencies really will provide that outlet for creative thinking and ideas, because those things are never going to go away. Even as we move to a fully digital data-based marketing world, creativity is still sort of the holy grail for bringing brands to life and creating that purpose and that storytelling. So that's always going to be there. It's interesting to see the consultancies get into the space, because I know they have a very strong rationale for why they are the best brand and business partners, especially when going back to what I said about CMOs are being looked upon to drive not just brand but business growth. Consultancies have that history, right? I mean, that's what that's their foundation. So they have a very strong case to be made there. I think it's interesting when you see, what is it, Accenture buying Droga 5. I mean, forever we saw the data and digital capabilities being very strong there, but what they lacked was the creative prowess. And so we may see some of that going on through acquisition moving forward. But, will there be an equilibrium? I would imagine that eventually, yes, but I think it will be. I don't think clients are ever going to fully give away all the things that were once the province solely of agencies. I think we've passed that point, and companies are recognizing that a lot of those capabilities are things that they should and can have in-house, and still work with agencies in a very productive way.
Right. Well, do you see any top opportunities for either the brands themselves or the marketing leaders today? I know you mentioned CMO Next earlier, and I don't know exactly, if you've had a meeting with those folks yet, but I'm curious what's on the horizon.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple different things. One of the things that we look at with our world's most influential CMOs list is we look at this concept of influence and being influential. And so this specifically for marketing leaders, we look at how they might be influential, certainly within their companies, right? And making brands sort of the focal point of and sort of the province of everybody within an organization, not just the marketing organization. And that's around CMOs having a seat at the table and really sort of making a marketing agenda as prioritized as any other agenda within companies. The second bucket is, CMOs having influence in the broader industry, around things that matter to all marketers. And then the third bucket is around cultural and societal issues, right? So, diversity and inclusion, sustainability, some of these things that CMOs talk about, and either tied to or separate from their companies. Some CMOs go out on the merits of their own brand identity as individuals and talk about some of these issues that they feel, because they recognize the responsibility and the mantle that they wear as visible executives to push agendas, right, and to push for change. So I think there's some opportunities there. For brands, I think there's going to be a real opportunity for brands to be, to help people with utility. I mean, we've talked about that for a number of years now, but I think the brands that win out are those that are really going to actually, enable something, right? I mean, they say there's some stat around apps that don't do anything just aren't used anymore. I mean, there has to be a commerce component. There has to be brands help people do things, not just aspire to things. And I'm not immediately coming up with a really good example there, but that's where brands are going to actually truly find value, where consumers are going to truly find value for brands. I think it's exciting around the fact that brands, there's going to be a whole lot more. Marketing is all about experience and not just experiential. I don't mean just activations, but just experience, like how they enhance life, how brands actually serve a purpose, not just talk about a purpose, but actually serve a purpose. I mean, that's going to be really exciting to see too. So those are some of the opportunities, as far as other opportunities for marketing leaders. I think we're seeing, just in career tracks, it's still not many, but we are seeing a lot of CMOs start to move into that CEO role, because I think those skills that CMOs are so known for, and the ones who do it well possess, can be successful at, can help in the CEO role. So, for example, Brian Nickel, who was the CMO of Taco Bell. Now he's the CEO of Chipotle, or Jeff Jones, who is the CMO of Target, is now the CEO of H&R Block. It's going to be fun to watch that progression happen as well, where we might start to see more and more CMOs move into the CEO role or president role, general management role. So that'll be fun to see.
Gotcha. Well, what do you see? Do you see any threats to CMOs at this point? There's a lot of bad things going on as well with all this change, like ad fraud and trust of their partners from time to time. Any threats that you see?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I sometimes I once a year I go out to California and I meet with CMOs out there at some of the companies in the Valley. And one thing that hit me last year when I went out was this talk around security, data security, and how that hasn't historically been an area that CMOs have really certainly had no responsibility for and hadn't had to really worry about. I mean, that was something that the CTO or CIO would deal with. But I think increasingly security is going to be something that CMOs are going to absolutely 100% need to be focused on and pay attention to and have some say over, because I mean that data breaches and all those things, those are brand, they spell brand catastrophe if they're that strong. So that's one area. It's interesting. Societal issues. I see. Marketers are just going. It's debatable, but marketers are really, they're diving into taking a stand, on societal issues. And I think they just feel like they want to, authenticity is what's key. So they'd rather be authentic and perhaps not supported by everybody in the population than be inauthentic just to win the favor of everybody. And so we're seeing more and more of that happen. I think they want to put forth their purpose. And if that means alienating some people, I think they take that as that's a risk that they are now willing to take for the sake of that authentic articulation of what their brand is and what they stand for, knowing that there's going to be so many people who find value in that as well. You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting to see how that continues moving forward. But right now we're in a place where whether it's Gillette or Nike, a lot of these brands and companies are saying, nope, this is what we stand for, and this is what we're going to go out there with. So very interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I know in Nike's example, it's played out really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't seem that way in the first couple of days, but then the tide certainly shifted for them. So
yeah, no, exactly. But so I love to get to know the folks behind the topics that we cover, and so I hope you will appease me and answer some more personal questions.
Sure.
So the one question I love asking is: has there been an experience in your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
Yeah. So, well, this is a fun one. I like this one. It does apply to my career, but it was so impactful, and it happened when I was so young. And I still, it's those moments, they're important because I still hold on to it to this day and the learning that I got from it. But I was in grad school. I was writing my master's thesis on Vietnam War correspondent Michael Hare. And many regarded him as being the absolute best reporter who covered Vietnam of anybody. He wrote articles that he sent to Esquire magazine. He was on the front lines of Vietnam, and he would send back literal dispatches to Esquire magazine in New York, and Esquire would publish them. And those articles were later compiled into his book called Dispatches. So it's still out there. You can go find it anywhere. But Michael Hare was, at the time when I was in grad school, he was a recluse, right? He was living in upstate New York. He hadn't granted any interviews with any media outlet for 10 years. I think the last time he had granted an interview was to Time magazine in 1984. And this was 1994 when I was finishing my master's thesis. And I had done all this research on him, and I learned everything I needed to know about him. But the one thing I wanted to do was get an interview with the man. I wanted to get him on the phone and actually interview him. And I was how old was I? I mean, I was 23, 24. And I thought, oh my God, who am I? I'm a master's student, grad student at Ohio University. Never, ever would this guy pay me 2 seconds, but I had to go for it. So I went for it. And this is obviously before internet. This is before email. This is before smartphones. Nothing. I wrote him a letter. I typed it up. I somehow found his address through the library, and I sent him a letter. And I said, I'd love to, here's my name. I'm working on my master's thesis. I would love to get an interview with you so we could talk about the work that you produce. And so 2 weeks go by, and I was at lunch, and I come back to my dorm room, and the phone on my wall with the curly cord rings, and I pick it up, and he said, Jennifer, he said, this is Michael Hare. And I can remember that moment. I dropped whatever I was holding, and I quickly found a pen and a paper and a recorder, and I sat down. And I said, Mr. Hare, thank you so much for calling me. And he said, well, I know you want to interview me. And so I proceeded to ask him my questions. We completed the interview. And at the end, I said, I have to ask you, Mr. Hare, why did you grant me the interview? And he said, I liked your letter. And it was just such a simple and profound statement. And he just said, I liked your letter. And it showed me the power of words and the power of, the way I wrote it was so straightforward. It wasn't all it wasn't all flowery. It was just, here's me. I didn't try to pretend I was somebody I wasn't. I said, here's me. I want to interview you. And it was very, it was certainly very respectful, but it was just plainly written and straightforward. And he said, I liked your letter. And I think it hit me where I felt anybody has access, is empowered, can have engagement with people, can ask them questions, can have relationship, can get response if you're just true and authentic and straightforward. And I came away from that moment thinking, wow, I was so grateful to him. I was so grateful because it meant so much. But I loved his candor, and it stuck with me to this day. And so I think I carry with me a little bit of Michael Hare in everything I do. So
what an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's awesome.
It was cool.
Well, if you were starting all over again, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Probably just that, don't hide behind anything you think you need to be or should be. And I know this is a what am I, a Gen Xer? We're not cool anymore. We're the slacker generation. So there's no mystique around us. But, I'm sure that millennials and Gen Z and everybody else, they don't worry about these things half as much. But I did. I worried about how I showed up. I worried about trying to figure out what I needed to know ahead of time. When the reality is, I've since figured out that if you're just honest with what you know and don't know, and literally you learn the most from people when you say, I don't explain that to me. I don't get it. I don't get it. Don't be afraid to feel ignorant or, at a loss, because everybody's trying to figure stuff out. So don't worry so much. That's what I would have told myself. Don't hide behind what you think you need to be. Just be you. Ask the questions. Tell them when you don't understand something, and people will be accessible if you're accessible. That's probably just the best how I can phrase it. So anyway, that's what I would tell little Jenny.
Well, what keeps you going? What drives you now?
My kids, my family. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Nothing else matters. They're everything. So, everything I do is for them, so I can be with them, so I can, create a good life for them and my husband. And it's just those simple, small things. So yeah, that's it.
Well, last two questions for you, more on the marketing front. But are there any brands, companies, causes that you follow you think other people should take notice of? I know this is a difficult question for somebody that covers the industry, but I'm more interested in you personally.
Well, I will say I'm a big supporter of organ donation. my husband was very involved in that area because of a personal connection. I actually have a personal connection in that my father was an organ donor after he had passed. And, I do think that is a cause that merits more attention. It's the gift of life. And, it's as simple as indicating on your driver's license that you're an organ donor. But I think it's something that, folks perhaps don't think about as much or forget. But it can be so incredibly transformative. And when you find those stories of people's lives that have been changed as a result of organ donation, it's incredibly inspiring. I actually was asked to moderate a panel discussion at the Cannes Lions main stage last year, and it was the CEO of Donate Life America. They had just come out with the world's biggest asshole campaign. And this is a campaign that came out to drive awareness around the cause of organ donation. And I was really pleased to be able to moderate that panel with Donate Life and their partner agency, because, to me, there isn't any better cause. I mean, there's so many incredible causes out there. And I think social media has done so much to enable people to get involved, either whether it's giving through Facebook's Donate Now platforms or things like that. But that's the one for me that I think hits me personally, but also is something that I think everybody should pay attention to. So that's the cause of brands, companies, and causes. I picked cause. So that's the one I would highlight.
Well, last question. What do you feel like the future of marketing is going to look like?
Oh, gosh. I mean, such a good question. I think it gets back to that concept of utility. I mean, there's always going to be a role for TV ads. Who doesn't like a really good TV ad, right? I mean, when a Geico commercial comes on, I laugh at it. I mean, that's just feel good. There's something there. I don't think just video advertising is going to go away. I think marketing is going to be personalization is going to be key, where in an environment where you feel like your data is 100% protected, and you feel like you're not, there's no risk of any kind there to you personally. I think the marketers who are good at building a connected, and a consistent experience across all touch points, to borrow a term that my good friend and colleague, Catherine Hayes, who's the former executive director of the Wharton Future of Advertising program, and she wrote the book with Professor Jerry Wind, Beyond Advertising. They talk about this in that book. But, marketing needs to be all those points connected together in a sort of a singular experience for people. And that consistency is just going to be so incredibly key. And I think the marketers who get that right are going to win. As a consumer, I'm sure you know this too, Alan. I mean, you gotta walk into a store and have the same vibe, the same experience as you do when you're online, or you're talking to the customer service rep, or the product or the package delivery. I mean, everything absolutely 100% needs to be personalized and consistent. I think those are the two words I'll leave with you for that.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.